Off we go. Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to Drive Steady. My name is Andy, and in this video, I am genuinely excited to be able to review a C8 Chevrolet Corvette. A car that's a unicorn, but still somewhat normal. All new, but with a lot of heritage. The C8 generation represents the commencement of the mid-engine platform for Corvette, something Chevrolet has been trying to do for over 60 years. Now, the Corvette also plays a part in American heritage. Astronauts wanted to drive it because not only was it an amazing performance car, it was the epitome of cool. Now, it wasn't all roses for Corvette. There was the third and fourth generation, which kind of provided bumps in the road, but things really started to turn around with the C5 Z06. From there, Chevrolet continued to refine the platform with the sixth generation, building amazing cars such as the ZR1 with a 638 horsepower engine, along with reviving a cool nameplate by the name of Grand Sport. Finally, the seventh generation, the generation that was supposed to be the mid-engine Corvette, but because of economic downturn was cut short. So through all the years of refinement and glory of the front-engine Corvette, and through all the speculation, here we are, mid-engine Corvette. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of the exterior, interior, and driving characteristics. In addition to that, answer questions such as, is it fun to drive? Is it a supercar? And finally, and most importantly, is it still a Corvette? So before getting started with the review, I wanted to address the individuals that were involved in me being able to review this mid-engine Corvette today. So if you happen to be watching, thank you. Now let's get on with the exterior portion of the review. And the first thing I'm going to cover is this color. This is called Accelerate Yellow, and it is absolutely stunning. It looks amazing on this mid-engine Corvette. Now, when I saw the pictures of Accelerate Yellow Metallic, I thought it was too highlighterish, for the lack of a better term. But when I see it here in person, I think it looks great because I feel like it's yellow and at the same time there's a little bit of a green tint. I feel like it resembles some of the Porsche colors where you've got a little bit of a green and yellowish type mixture, especially in specific types of sunlight or shade hitting the car. But now let's move on to the rest of the exterior. I want to talk about the hood and just the general front end design. When I saw it for the first time on the dealer tour, I thought that this looks like a Corvette. This is the evolution or the revolution of what a Corvette should look like. So it looks unmistakably like a Corvette. The headlights have a really nice design. I love the LED style daytime running lamps. In addition to that, you have LED type headlights, and you've got a little Easter egg here with the Corvette logo on the side, which looks very nice. In addition to that, the entire headlight looks like it's housed in a black style housing, which sets off really nicely and provides a great contrast with the rest of the exterior paint. Now we move down to the front end portion of the Corvette. Obviously, you've got massive air inlets here on each side. In addition to that, in the middle and right behind them are these humongous intercoolers that feed cold air through lines through to the back of the car to make sure everything is properly cooled. The owner of this car spec'd out the splitters here in carbon fiber, which I think is a great touch and provides a wonderful contrast with this Accelerate Yellow paint. Next, we move on to this bottom spoiler here. This is a Z51 equipped car. Therefore, you get this spoiler, and it's functional. It provides a lot of downforce, so much so that it reduces the top speed of the Corvette down to 184 miles per hour, I believe down from about 190 or 191, something like that. But anyway, it's a nice piece, and again, like I said, it is very, very functional. Now let's move up to the hood portion, and this is a very intricately designed piece, and let me explain why. The hood lines, there are two main ones. There's one that runs along the center of the hood, which reminds me a lot of a Stinger style hood, and then it flows very nicely to the top here to the bubble style roof. And then separately, the second line runs to the edges of the car and goes to the side profile. So it's a very intricately designed hood. It flows very nicely. Separately, the thing I probably like the most about this hood is this front area here right above the Corvette badge. It reminds me so much of a Lamborghini Aventador hood. It's just almost like Corvette copied Lamborghini and they put this trunk design or frunk design on the Corvette hood. So let's talk about this hood, or I guess the frunk or the storage in the front, because that's one of the elements of a mid-engine car. Your trunk moves to the front. So there's a couple ways of opening the frunk. You obviously can do it using the key. There's a button on the interior, but in addition to that, there's a little hidden button right here underneath the headlight. So if I push this, the hood pops open. Now you're asking yourself, what if somebody watches this video and knows that there's this hidden button down here and they come and try and steal something out of my trunk? Don't worry, you need the key in order for this button to work, or you need the car to be unlocked in order for that button to work. Okay, so now let's talk about the frunk. Opening it up initially, this hood is actually very light. It's lighter than I ever imagined it to be. It's just like finger movement. So about the storage space, it's actually very deep versus having a big opening. It's quite substantial actually for being a frunk, and I could easily see probably 2 duffel bags, just the normal standard duffel bag, fitting in here. So it is very deep, and I do think it is very unexpected for a car that's mid-engine to have a frunk that is this substantial. Now moving to the side profile of the C8 Corvette, and I want to talk about 2 interesting things in particular. The first one is the mirror design. Now the mirror itself is actually a really cool looking design. I think this was one of the things that was lacking in the C7 and the C6. It was just an ordinary looking thing, and now Corvette has done a really nice job of designing this mirror. But the thing that's interesting about the mirror is the plate that it's sitting on, or the extension from the body that it's sitting on. If you pay close attention, the driver's side extension and the passenger side extension are not of equal length. The passenger side mirror sits out 2 inches further versus the driver's side, and that's to help with visibility. Now, the next interesting thing about the side profile here is how you get into the car, or how you unlock the car. The Corvette has electronic door releases. So what happens if your battery's dead? Now, Corvette thought about this, so they've got like this little hidden compartment underneath the door where you're able to manually unlock it with a key. So that's very clever and very insightful and forward thinking by Chevrolet. Now, speaking of the side sill, you have 2 options. Standard, the Corvette comes with this black trim piece, but if you don't like it in this black color, you can get it body color matte. So this side piece can be painted Accelerate yellow or Torch red, or whatever color your C8 is painted in. Now, overall, the side profile of the C8 Corvette was kind of head scratching for me the first time I saw it. And the reason, because I thought it was too rear proportioned, or too much of the car was in the rear and not enough of it was in the front. And now that I see it in person and up close, and my eyes have kind of adjusted to it, I feel like it looks just fine. I know there are certain people out there who shared my opinion when I originally saw it, but rest assured it looks much, much better in person, and it does look proportional. All right, now I wanted to talk about the wheel design of the C8 Corvette. Obviously, you can see here the owner has modified this car with aftermarket wheels. So these sit on 20-inch front and 22-inch rear wheels. So this will give you a perspective if you wanted to put bigger wheels on your C8 Corvette. But the standard wheel is actually the same size. There are two options. One is a traditional 5-spoke design, and the other one is a little variation. It's called Trident. But no matter which design wheel you get 19 by 8.5 in the front and 20 by 11 in the rear. Moving to the tires, you get the same tire size whether you get the base trim or the Z51. There are 245/35 up front, 305/30 in the rear. Now the difference between the base and the Z51 is that the base version comes with Michelin all-season tires, and the Z51 comes with the popular Michelin Pilot 4S tires. Moving inside the wheelbarrow, let's talk about the calipers and the rotors, essentially the brakes. Now if you go with the base level trim, it's 12.6-inch rotors in the front and 13.6 inches in the rear. If you go with the Z51, you get bigger brakes, 13.3 in the front, 13.8 in the rear. Now the one thing I am going to complain about these brakes is that they don't have any venting, they don't have any slotting. Now I know that some of those things are gimmicks, and having a smooth surface brake rotor is more thermally efficient, but the venting and the slotting makes it look cool, and I wish it had it. But the owner of this car has color matched the brake calipers, and I think that looks fantastic, and it does add a little bit of flair that I'm looking for. All right, so now we're on the rear end of the Corvette, and obviously the biggest departure from the C7 to the C8 is now that the engine is in the back. So there's a lot of things to talk about back here. So before I talk about the engine, I want to talk about a little bit of the exterior design from the back end perspective. Now, first things first, the spoiler. You have three options. You could not get a spoiler, and that's on the base car. You can get a Z51 spoiler, which is the one you see here. And then finally, you can get the high wing spoiler, which I have not seen, so I don't have an opinion on. Now going back to the former, the Z51 spoiler. When I saw it the first time, I thought it looked terrible. But when I see it in person, it looks pretty good actually, especially because it's painted in black. It contrasts the body color of the car very nicely. The next thing I want to talk about are the tail lights. Remember when it went from the C6 to the C7, everybody went crazy. Oh, they're not going to have circle headlights. Well, I don't really hear people complaining about that anymore. The thing I'm hearing more often now is that these tail lights look more like the Camaro's lights, or look too similar to the Camaro's lights. Well, I originally thought that too, but after seeing it in person, I think they look nothing like the Camaro lights, and they flow very, very nicely with the rear end of this car. Now the next thing down here, you've got these exit vents where it's pulling in air from the side skirts and dissipating heat from the engine bay here. And finally, another departure here on the rear end are the exhaust tips. Now if you're familiar with a C5, C6, C7, all of them had mid-mounted exhaust tips. But in the C8, you can see that they're separated and they're split to the ends of the car. This one has the Z51 package, which means you get the performance exhaust. So take a listen to what that sounds like. So now that we heard the exhaust, let's talk about what's actually making that noise. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about this hood design. I think it's very cool. It's got these vents here to extract heat. And the coolest thing, obviously, about a mid-engine car is having the glass so you can see the engine from the outside. Now, how do you pop open the trunk? You could obviously do it with a button on the key, and then separately there's a button down here underneath the latch, which is probably the way most people are going to lift it open. Where is it? Here it is. So it's kind of soft open, and it's also soft close, and I'll show you that here in a second. But this is the LT2. It's a derivative of the LT1. It's actually pretty similar in architecture, but it makes more power 490 horsepower with 465 pounds-feet of torque. Now, because this has the Z51 package, you get 5 additional horsepower and 5 additional pounds-feet of torque, bringing your numbers up to 495 and 470 respectively. In addition to that, this is a dry sump motor, whether you get the Z51 or not, and the numbers are absolutely blistering. 0 to 60 in 2.8, 2.9 seconds with the Z51 package. And then if you don't get the Z51, you go with the base, it's 3 seconds or 3.1 seconds, which is pretty significant and fast considering the base price of this car. So now let's talk about the transmission. There is no manual transmission anymore, so that's kind of a bummer, but it does have a double clutch, and at least it's not just a regular automatic. So it's 8 speeds. It was developed by Tremec and Chevrolet, and I think Ford also had a little bit of say in there. But like I said, it's an 8-speed. It's called the TR9080. And it's practically the same architecture transmission as you find in the GT500. The only difference is that the Corvette has an 8-speed and the GT500 has a 7-speed. But a couple more points about the engine, and I know some of you are saying that who cares, but let's talk about the fuel efficiency. This thing shuts off half of its cylinders and can run on 4. So the fuel efficiency is pretty good at 15 in the city, 27 in the highway for a combined average of 19. Now, I don't know about you, but my Shelby GT350 barely gets 13 or 14 combined miles per gallon average. Now, another interesting thing about the C8 Corvette is that it has a trunk in the back. This is something you do not see in a lot of mid-engine cars or supercars. So Chevrolet wanted to make sure that there was enough cargo space in the Corvette, especially considering that the C6 and the C7 generations had plenty of cargo space and room for you to put your things. So the Corvette has 2 trunks, or the C8 Corvette has 2 trunks, one in the front and one in the rear, and this one in the rear is actually quite substantial. Chevrolet says that you can put 2 golf bags in here, and I believe them, because not only is the opening very big, but in addition to that, the depth, there's a lot of room to go down here, and actually has like a second level down here towards the bottom. So I truly believe that you can put a lot of stuff back here. Beyond just your cargo, the Targa top actually goes back here. Now, moving along to one of my more favorite things about the trunk, specifically how you close the trunk or the hood with respects to this being in the engine being in the back here, is this grab handle. Now, this is something that I saw in the AMG GTR that I reviewed several months ago. And this grab handle is really convenient because if you're particular about getting fingerprints on your paint, this thing is actually very helpful. In addition to that, the Corvette has a soft closing latch. So you just use this grab handle, you pull it down, and it closes all by itself without you having to touch your paint. Now let's move to the inside of the C8 Corvette. And the first thing I gotta say is that there is so much customization available for the interior of this new generation Corvette. You can get the steering wheel in sway, you can get the seat belts in a different color, the stitching in a different color, you can have a color override. So if you want like orange seat belts in a brown natural color interior, you can do that as long as you're willing to pay for it, of course. But Chevrolet has come a long distance in interior, and it's getting pretty close at Porsche level of customization. It's not there, but it's getting better, I guess. And once you're inside the car, you can tell that Chevrolet has spent a lot of time on this interior. The overall quality, the fit, and the finish. Now, this car has a 3LT interior. There's a 1LT, 2LT, and obviously, as I mentioned, the 3LT is the highest trim, and the stuff in here looks great. The stitching looks fairly good. It's even all across. The fitment looks fine. So now let's talk about the seats. You have 3 options. You have the GT1, the GT2, which you get in the 2LT or above, and then you have the competition seat. I believe I'm sitting in the GT2 seat, which is very, very comfortable. The bolstering is adjustable. The lumbar is there. It just feels right. So really, really nice seat. Now moving along to the steering wheel. The steering wheel is very interesting because of its shape. It's not a square, it's still flat bottom, but it's kind of like a square circle or a squircle. I don't know if that's what they were calling it, but nonetheless, it does look interesting, and it does have the yellow stitching, which look fantastic. Now in this car, it does have the Alcantara steering wheel, which I'm not really a fan of. I think Alcantara looks terrible once it's worn out, which is why I like to avoid it at all costs, and I wish it was just an all-leather steering wheel, which you can get, by the way, but that's what this car has. Now, the one thing I'm going to complain about, or two things I'm going to complain about regarding this steering wheel, is this center section and just the spokes. When I look at it, I feel like I'm looking at something that looks relatively close or resembles steering wheels from like 1980 Cadillacs. So I don't know if that's just my imagination, but I don't know, that's kind of what I remember. And not to say that the steering wheel looks bad, but I don't know, I just kind of draw that resemblance. And the other thing is, there's like this piece, these black trim pieces, they're plastic. I wish they were metal or just some other different type of more expensive looking material. Carbon fiber actually would have been great. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention about these seats is they are heated and cooled or ventilated as long as you get 2LT or 3LT. So now that that's out of the way, now let's talk about the gauge cluster. The gauge cluster is all digital, as opposed to in the C7, it was like a hybrid approach. You had the analog gauges on the left and the right and a center screen. But here in the C8, it's all digital. There are no more analog gauges, and there's a lot of information in here. They are tied to the driving mode, so they do switch whenever you go from sport to tour to eco to track. And before moving up to the head-up display, this car has the carbon fiber trim, which gives you carbon fiber around the gauge cluster, and it looks really, really nice, continued by on the passenger and the driver's side door panels. So if it was my car, my C8, I would absolutely get this carbon fiber trimming. Now, moving up to the head-up display. The head-up display is something that you've seen in several generations of Corvette now. It is tied to the driving mode, so as you switch your mode, the look of the head-up display also changes. It's very clear, it's very sharp, I have no complaints about it. It's just me personally, I'm not a big fan of head-up displays. I typically end up turning them off or just not paying much attention to them. Now, talking about the rear view mirror, this is actually really, really cool. There's a rear camera that's mounted on top of the hood or the trunk of the C8 Corvette. And that camera directly projects onto the rear view mirror. Now, this is very handy because typically mid-engine supercars have bad outward rear visibility. Actually, it's very cool. A lot of technology, you have the ability to zoom in, change the brightness, change the angle. So it's actually very cutting edge. And I believe Chevrolet took this from Cadillac, or shares it with Cadillac. Now, the other thing that I love about Corvettes are the fact that most new age Corvettes double as targa tops. You have the ability to take the roof off, and Corvette has gotten better with structural rigidity. So whether you have the roof on or off, it's just as structurally sound. So the way you take the roof off, there are three latches. There's one on the driver's side, there's one on the passenger side, and then there's one towards the middle of the car. So you unlatch these three, you take the roof off. It's very lightweight. You have the ability to put it in your rear trunk. There's these guides, so you slide it right in, you snap it in place, and you've got an instant targa top. Now, one thing about this car, it does have the transparent roof, and I think it makes a big difference in making the interior of the C8 look much bigger or feel much bigger. So I do recommend the transparent top. It is a nice feature to have. Now let's come down into the center section of the interior for the C8 Corvette, and you're immediately greeted with this touchscreen infotainment display. It's an 8-inch screen. One of the things that I complained about, and I still feel strongly about, is that there's so much bezel on the screen. I mean, we're in 2020 now, and screens are getting so advanced and so crisp and clear, and I'm almost disappointed to see that this screen has this much bezel. I'm just curious why Chevrolet would not put something with less bezel on in the C8 Corvette. But anyway, it is a touchscreen. It is very high resolution. It's very crisp. In my opinion, it's easy to navigate. The volume adjustment and the home key adjustment are to the left of the screen here. So if your passenger would like to raise the volume, they're really out of luck. And just in general, the passenger is kind of really segregated in this interior. It's very driver focused. Everything is just pointing at the driver. Now coming down to the gear selector, and it's really interestingly laid out, and there's a difference in the buttons here. P is a button and obviously stands for park. R is for reverse, and it's actually a toggle switch. You pull it. N is another button. D for drive is another pull switch or a toggle switch like it is for reverse, and then M, which stands for manual mode, is another button. So it's interesting how Chevrolet did that. Now moving to the right of the transmission selector or the gear selector, you have three buttons. The first one is to turn traction control off. Then you've got the front lift system, which is very technologically advanced. So the front lift system lifts 40 millimeters in, I believe, 2.8 seconds, which is very fast compared to other supercars or hypercars. You don't have to come to a location and push the button and sit there and wait for 15 seconds for the car to lift. In addition to that, it has memory, or you can store locations. For example, if your house had a very steep driveway, you just program it into the front lift system, and every time you come to your house, bloop, it will raise up and you won't have to manually push it every single time. Now that is forward thinking and a very clever feature. Then you've got the camera. So specifically the front camera. I've counted 4 cameras in this Corvette. There's 2 in the front and 2 in the rear. And these 4 cameras give you absolutely amazing all angle visibility of where you are. There's a front view, there's a back view, there's a top view. You can see it from the side, and it's very helpful when you're in a car of this size, specifically a mid-engine car. And then moving down, you have the drive mode selector, which is of great quality. You can rest your hand on it really nicely, and it helps you switch through the modes. I believe there's My Mode, Eco Mode, Sport, Tour, Track, and in addition to that, you also have the Z mode. Now the Z mode is really cool. You push the button and the Z letter actually lights up, and it allows you to tailor a sporty mode. This is very similar to what BMW M cars have. It's called M dynamic mode, and you push this button, it immediately tailors everything into a sporty setting. And finally, talking about the rest of the center section here, you have 2 cup holders, you have a storage bin here underneath your arm that has a USB plug-in, a USB Type-C, and also looks like an auxiliary cable. Now going all the way back behind your arm, you have a wireless charging station, which is really convenient because a lot of new phones have wireless charging capabilities. But maybe you're asking yourself this: what if I don't have a wireless charging phone? Or what if I already have a wired charging device for my phone? Well, where's the cigarette lighter? Where do I plug it in? I don't really see it anywhere. Well, Corvette has decided to hide it from you. It's all the way underneath the passenger side compartment here, way underneath the footwell. And here you can see it. I've got a phone charger plugged into it. So if you're looking for it, that's where it is. It does exist. Now moving beyond that, now that wireless charging area kind of doubles as a storage area, there's like these little Corvette logos that are embossed into this area. Separately, you go up from here, you see a speaker grill, which also has the Corvette logo kind of hidden in there. You have to look at it at a certain angle to see it, but it's really cool. And then finally, the thing that's probably one of, if not the coolest things about having a mid-engine car is the glass behind you. You can just look over your shoulder. You can see all the carbon fiber, the intake manifold. You can see your engine rumbling when it's running. So there's nothing cooler than being able to see your engine from inside the car. Now the thing I've left to the end is a controversial piece, and it's this wall. I remember seeing sketches of the C8 interior on the Corvette form, and when many people saw this wall, people were like, what the hell is that? It looks so weird and terrible. And honestly, it flows really well. It's almost like your hand rests here, and once you get used to the buttons, everything for the driver is pretty much sectioned here at the top. Everything for the passenger is more towards the bottom, and then you've got the climate control buttons here for which direction you want the air to blow in, the fan speed, turning the air conditioning on or off. It does definitely catch you off guard when you sit in it for the first time, but you get used to it very, very quickly, and it's actually really cool to look at because no other car has this type of climate control layout. So it's another unique point for the Corvette interior, and maybe I feel like Corvette did this on purpose to stand out. But overall, the interior is absolutely fantastic. Compared to the C7, it feels different. It doesn't feel smaller. I don't feel cramped in here whatsoever. But overall, the materials are great. This is a 3LT car, so it's got the finest quality materials. So I would be interested to see what a 1LT looks like. But again, overall, it's fantastic. I would skip the Alcantara. Trust me, as a person who's owned a long-term Alcantara equipped car, they look terrible after a certain point. So go with the all leather. That's what I would do. Some of the complaints for me, and I'm really nitpicking here, is like I said, the plastic here on the steering wheel and then the screen bezel. Otherwise, I have no real big complaints. All right, so now we're moving to the driving portion of the review. And before I suffocate in here, let me turn the car on. The C8 Corvette is a push button start like most cars nowadays. Push the button, foot on the brake. Let's hear it fired up. Sounds really satisfying, actually. All right, now that the AC is going, I wanted to show you what the key looks like. That's the Corvette key with the badge there and several buttons on that side. Popping the frunk, popping the trunk, unlock, lock, and remote start right here in the middle. Let me put this aside here for a second. Put my seatbelt on. Yellow seatbelts. I like them a lot, actually. Make sure my microphone is not blocked. All right, so before getting started, I must say that the visibility in this car is actually really good for a mid-engine supercar. The visibility out in front of me is fantastic because the belt line of the C8 dropped significantly compared to the C7. It's really low. I can see very well outside the driver and the passenger side, my peripherals. I can see everything really well. Over my shoulders, it's actually really good. The C8 does have blind spot monitoring, but on this side, on the passenger side, over the shoulder is a little tough. Therefore, making the adjustments on the passenger side mirror that much more important. And actually, this is where that hinge, you know, the extension where the mirror is latched onto, that is why it's so far out. So you have better visibility because it's difficult to kind of see over your shoulder here. All right, so let's hit the road. Pull my lever here. I am in sport. Release the parking brake. And off we go. It immediately engages, so you set off. You don't have to press the gas whatsoever. The engagement is like a double clutch. It's not like an automatic. There's that initial delay where the clutches are grabbing. So at low speeds, it's totally smooth. It does not jerk. It's like sometimes when you see with certain single clutch transmissions, double clutch don't do that anymore. I'm going out of the driveway. I need to be very careful. This car does have a little bit of a drop and very big wheels. So here we go. Off we go. All right. So initially, the seating position is actually spot on. This is fantastic. Separately, the seats are very comfortable. I don't foresee any type of issues with long road trips and such. I bet you the GT1 seats are probably more comfortable. The bolsters are pretty aggressive in this seat, but they are a very comfortable seat. They have a lot of adjustment. All right, now the steering feel. I'm driving in sport. It feels pretty direct. I do feel a little bit of, I don't know, vagueness. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Not too heavy, it's not too firm. I actually think it's pretty good. Let me downshift here. Let me give it a little gas. Yes, it's pretty quick. It's not, for some reason, I don't feel like it's blisteringly fast. It's fast. It's not that it's slow, but it's not something where it's gonna, I feel like the 0-60 time is very impressive, but here we go. Let me see if I could get something here. Got a clear road down to first. Let's see. First, off we go. Yeah, it's really fast. It's not slow. The torque does build up very progressively. It's not like a turbo shove or a supercharger shove. So it does feel very neutral, I guess, for the lack of a better term. Otherwise, the engine is like a pussycat. It's so smooth, especially paired with the double clutch. The paddle shifters are actually very immediate. You pull on the paddle and the gear is right there. And I think part of that is because Chevrolet directly mounted these paddle shifters to the transmission. So I think they learned when they made a mistake with the C7 and the 8-speed, the automatic that is, and that there was a terrible lag. You would pull on the shifter or the paddle and it would just wait and then shift. So this one doesn't have that at all. That's just a far gone conclusion. The downshifts, the upshifts, everything is just immediate and it works really, really well. Get another one here and roll on it. Yeah. It's really fast. Bangs and the crackles and the pops that you get while you're driving are very satisfying. The transmission shift and bang, pop, you just hear those shifts clicking off, and it's very, very satisfying. This car feels absolutely fantastic. It's just miles and miles ahead of any Corvette I have ever driven, and the transmission is good. The engine, I don't know. I feel like the common complaint is that the exhaust note is a little lacking, and I'm a little mixed there. I do feel like it may need a little bit more, but the way it is not that bad actually. It's pretty good. Now, does it feel like a Corvette? Is this a Corvette? That's the question I asked myself early on in the video, and I do feel there are some things that are definitely a Corvette. I don't know, there's just a feel when you get into a Corvette, you drive it, there's like this coolness factor, and I don't know if it's subconscious, but you definitely feel that. And on top of that, I feel like the mid-engine thing is kind of building on it and making it feel more special. So does it feel like a Corvette? Yes and no. It's definitely, some of the Corvette stuff is definitely there. The looks, there's some Corvette stuff there. The feel, I don't know, guys, it just feels so different. That engine behind me and the sound, the experience of the engine behind me makes it feel unlike a Corvette. But there are some Corvette things in here for sure. The engine still feels like a Corvette, and not surprisingly, it's the LT2. It's practically the same thing as an LT1. So that feels very Corvette-ish. The double clutch does not feel like a Corvette. Corvettes have typically not had the best automatic transmissions, so this doesn't really feel like a Corvette, or at least the transmission doesn't. So, I mean, those are my overall thoughts of the Corvette argument. So, I don't know what's the best way to frame it. Yes, there are some Corvette stuff here, but for the most part, I think Corvette was trying to nail some of the intangibles of the Corvette, like the front and the rear storage, the, I guess, somewhat roomy interior. But for the most part, the feel, the mechanics, all of that stuff does not feel, I don't know, like a Corvette anymore. Subconsciously, it definitely feels like, oh wow, yeah, I'm driving a Corvette. But the feel, the fingertips don't feel like it's a Corvette. I don't know, that's just my opinion. So that's the end of the video. I hope it was informative. I know I haven't covered everything. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments below. But thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.